Welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Source. I'm your host, Dadu, and today we have a very special guest with us, prominent Twitter personality and advocate for the adoption of a Bitcoin standard within the Muslim community. As the co-founder of Bitcoin Majlis, which provides educational resources and guidance for Muslims to adopt the Bitcoin standard, he firmly believes that Bitcoin is the most Islamic form of money and a way for Muslims to escape the fiat-based system. Welcome to the show, Muslim Bitcoiner.
Thank you.
So, like I was saying to you off air, like this conversation is really one that I've really been looking forward to because um, you don't see a lot of platforms, you don't see a lot of places in the Bitcoin ecosystem really talking about the connection or the synergy between Bitcoin and Islam. So I'm super excited to have you on today, and I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation so that my audience can kind of learn more about you, your religion, Islam, and just how Bitcoin is pretty much, sound, safe money.
Yeah, thank you. I think, like we've talked about, I think there's definitely a connection there, and I feel like a lot of Muslims aren't really picking up on it. And even whenever you look up like a fatwa or a ruling or an opinion on Bitcoin from a scholar. Sometimes they'll, obviously there are some scholars that'll say that it's haram or it's prohibited in Islam, but even the ones that do say it's halal or permissible, then I feel like they kind of miss the sound money aspect. They'll just kind of like look at Bitcoin. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, you can invest in this. It's not technically money, but you can invest in it and make money off of it. Kind of like, they completely missed the point of Bitcoin. I feel like.
Yeah, so for our listeners, can you elaborate on why you consider Bitcoin not just any cryptocurrency, but the most Islamic form of money?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it helps to start the conversation with talking about our current fiat system. So, as probably many of your listeners already know, the fiat system is inherently unethical and very corrupt. There's only, there's a certain group of people that control the money supply and the distribution of money. And what I think is more interesting from the Muslim perspective is that the fiat system is inherently based on what's called riba, or it's the Arabic word for interest or usury. So one of the things that's prohibited in Islam is the practice of usury. Now, historically, usury just meant any amount of interest, but over time that the definition of usury changed to mean exorbitant amount of interest. But for Muslims, for living all around the world, for most of us, we believe that any amount of interest is inherently like immoral and completely prohibited, and it's considered like one of the most heinous sins that you can do in Islam. So, with that in mind, the way the fiat system operates is that new money can only be created through issuing debt, and that issuance of debt is always going to have interest tied to it. So, whenever you have like your fiat stored in a bank account, one, it's not actually stored in a bank account, but two, the whenever you do deposit your fiat into a bank account, all you're doing is enabling the more creation of fiat that's inherently going to be tied to interest. So I think this, whenever you explain the problem to a Muslim first, I think they you kind of have to get them to start understanding that the current fiat system is based on riba, and there's absolutely no escaping that. I mean, even when you look at the very base layer of the fiat system, is basically just U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. I mean, these things are just debt-based instruments that yield interest. I mean, at the very base layer of the fiat protocol is just riba. So once you kind of make that case, then I think a lot of Muslims will say, "Oh, well, that means we need to go back to a gold and silver standard." Well, historically, that has been money, especially in the Islamic world, is the money that we've used. But the problem is that the adopting a gold and silver standard is what eventually led to the current fiat system that we have. The only way to make gold and silver work on a in a globalized economy or globalized system is you have to put layers or credit layers on top of gold and silver, because you can't send gold and silver over large distances and settle it and be able to settle it. So what banks ended up doing is that instead of actually transferring the gold between themselves, they can just settle accounts between themselves. And because no one ever withdraws their gold and silver, what bankers can do is that they can actually do fractional reserve banking, and when you do that, all you're doing is issuing debt and usury-based debt on top of the gold and silver standard. So once you kind of realize the weaknesses of gold and silver, then the only other alternative we have, I think, is Bitcoin. And what makes Bitcoin very attractive from the Muslim perspective is that it's not based off of this proof of debt system that fiat is on. It's based on proof of work. So you have to expend energy in order to make more of it, and there's a limited supply of it of 21 million, so that no one is in. It makes it very hard to actually do usury-based transactions on Bitcoin because it's also because it's digital and because it has a fixed supply. And also, what separates, I guess there's lots of things that separates Bitcoin and crypto. What I like to say is that crypto is just another app built on top of the fiat protocol, but Bitcoin is its own separate protocol that's trying to that is money outside of the fiat system. And what's important to keep in mind as a Muslim is that basically all of these cryptos kind of emerged from unethical foundations where you have a a startup or a company or a group of individuals that profit off of the initial distribution of the tokens, and they dictate the roadmap, and they get to decide how the project is going to run. Where on the other hand, Bitcoin doesn't have that. The way it was generated, or I guess the way Bitcoin first came about, wasn't through a company. It wasn't through a group of individuals profiting. It was just on the cypherpunk mailing list where this anonymous person named Satoshi Nakamoto kind of put it out to the world, and he invited people to join him in getting this network spun up. And it's at the very base layer of Bitcoin, it's just a protocol, and you can either, no one is forcing you to join the protocol, and in that sense, Bitcoin is very separate from crypto, especially when you look at it not just from the technical and economic aspects, but especially from the ethical aspect. And I think that kind of gives a solid case, I think, for Muslims to look at Bitcoin, because it's a very fair system where everyone has to abide by the same rules. Whereas in fiat, you only have a group of individuals that profit at the expense of other people. And it's basically fiat, not only is the problem that it has riba at its base layer, but fiat inherently is just theft, where other people get to print money, and they basically violate other people's property rights because they get to print money that other people cannot print.
Yes, and I love how you discuss like some of the dangers of riba in context of the global fiat system, because I think a lot of Muslims across the world, sometimes their countries might suppress Bitcoin. They don't have the educational platforms in the media like some other countries do. So I think that when you start having people become educated on Bitcoin, riba is going to obviously be something that's of major concern to them. And I love how you just really broke down the differences between the two. And you've always expressed concerns about alternative coins on your platform. You know, in your view, Bitcoin obviously distinguishes itself from these other cryptocurrencies. But how do you look at that in the context of like Islamic finance? Because there's so many rules and parameters there when it comes to finance in the Muslim religion. So could you kind of break down like some concerns that all coins could have versus like a Bitcoin, sovereign wealth savings account kind of approach?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, this is actually kind of hard to initially explain to Muslims, because they'll look at Bitcoin and crypto as like, it's just digital money. So they just kind of lump them into the same category. But like I said, I think, there's a whole list of differences between Bitcoin and crypto. And I think I like to kind of group them within, like, there's like technical issues, there's economic issues. And for me, I think, as a Muslim, there's also ethical issues that I feel like that ethical part doesn't really get talked about enough, and it's actually something we've written about on our Bitcoin Majlis platform, where we try to discuss like why crypto is inherently unethical. And I think you know when you take into account that there's in crypto there's only a certain group of people that are able to profit at the expense of other people, I think that's inherently immoral. I mean, it's basically just theft. So, whenever and the thing is people will look at Bitcoin and they'll say, oh, it's basically the same thing. It basically started the same way as crypto because you had Satoshi mining the first coins, and he has a bunch of coins relative to everybody else. What you have to keep in mind though is that there wasn't like an ICO or a pre-mine. Anyone was able to join. That's the key difference, is that with all, and that now that Bitcoin is discovered, I like to think of Bitcoin as being a discovery. Now that Bitcoin is discovered, whenever another person or another group of people want to recreate Bitcoin, thing is that you can't really recreate digital scarcity twice. And whenever you do try to attempt to recreate Bitcoin, all you do is you end up recreating whatever the fiat system is trying to do, because you have to control it. You have to make sure that other people can't profit off of it. You have to control the supply. You have to control the distribution of it. You also have to control kind of like the future outlook of what the project is going to do. And I think another difference is that Bitcoin is just trying to be money. Like, you don't have to tack on all of these other utilities on top of Bitcoin for it to be worth something. And that's, I think, something that's really lost on a lot of people that are in crypto, is that in these altcoins, they try to like, oh, well, this altcoin is better than Bitcoin because it does X or it does Y or it does Z. But the thing is, if you have to tack on these other utilities on top of your token, you inherently admit that the token is worthless unless you put the utility on there to make it better than Bitcoin. And I feel like a lot of crypto enthusiasts kind of miss that aspect. They just kind of immediately just go. They're like, they're very high time preference in a way. That's why I like to think of crypto as just another app built on top of the fiat protocol, because you end up naturally recreating whatever we have in the fiat system, where I mean, one classic example of a utility that's in crypto is generating yield. And I think it's lost on a lot of people that money is not supposed to generate yield. That's what securities do. Securities are things that generate yield. So that just kind of inherently you kind of inherently realize that any of these altcoin projects are basically just securities, because they're trying to offer all of these other non-monetary utilities that you can find in securities, like finding a stock or buying a bond. Like, all of these things give you extra income that you can get. But the major difference is that, at least like with a stock, for example, you have an underlying asset that generates the revenue. For crypto, there's nothing generating. It's just kind of like this self-perpetuating machine, or this cycle where you stake money, or sorry, you stake your token, you get yield, and then you put that yield to stake it back, and you get more, and then it's just like this cycle that keeps repeating. But if you take all of that, you look at all of that, it's just the same way that what people do in fiat whenever they buy and they sell debt to people that are closest to the money printer. That's basically the way they make money, is that they just buy and sell debt at and passing on higher interest rates to other customers. And I feel like crypto is just kind of that same way. But on the other hand, you have Bitcoin, and all it is just a ledger, and it's just trying to be money, and that's it. And I think, for Muslims that are looking at the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, you have to understand that, like, Bitcoin, it's actually very hard, or pretty much impossible, to be able to issue debt-based instruments on top of Bitcoin. You can do that, but eventually you're going to get wrecked. We see this with all of these exchanges that offer all of this yield on their Bitcoin and crypto products. And what happens with all of them? They end up getting wrecked. That's good. Money is supposed to work that way. Sound money is supposed to work that way. That if you're going to engage in risky business that you normally do in fiat, you're inherently just going to get wrecked on a Bitcoin standard.
Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay, what's the second best? There is no second best. There's no second best crypto asset. There's a crypto asset. It's called Bitcoin, right? Right? There's no second best, okay? But take all your money, buy Bitcoin, then take all your time, figure out how to borrow more money to buy more Bitcoin, then take all your time and figure out what you can sell to buy Bitcoin. And if you absolutely love the thing that you don't want to sell it, Go mortgage your house and buy Bitcoin with it. And if you've got a business that you love because your family works for the business that's in your family for 37 years and you can't bear to sell it, mortgage it, finance it, and convert the proceeds into the hardest money on earth, which is Bitcoin.
This channel is for education purposes only and is not affiliated with any financial institution. This is not financial advice. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now back to the episode.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. And, given the diverse views from within the Muslim community worldwide, what challenges have you encountered promoting the adoption of the Bitcoin standard among those Muslims?
Yeah, I think, one of the reasons why my brother and we started this education-based platform called Bitcoin Majlis. So Majlis is the Arabic word for kind of like a gathering or a council. So, one of the things that we saw was that the dialogue around Bitcoin is among the Muslim community is just very lacking. And, I talked about this before, but, one of the things that kind of prompted me to start this Bitcoin Majlis platform is that, I saw this this one podcast episode with this one scholar. His name is Nu'man Ali Khan. So he's like a very famous. I mean, I guess some people don't consider him a scholar or whatever, but he's a very famous YouTube personality. And he had, like other people that are specialized in Islamic finance that were on the podcast episode, and the title of the episode was called Bitcoin, and it was called something. So I was like really excited when I saw that. I was like, oh my God, this guy's going to get orange pill. This is going to be great. So I turn on the podcast episode and I listen to it, and they spend maybe like 5 to 10 minutes talking about Bitcoin, and then they start talking about altcoins. They start talking about NFTs, Web3, metaverse. The subject completely gets derailed, and I think after listening to that, that's like when I told my brother, I was like, dude, we need to start something, because like the dialogue around Bitcoin is just completely lacking, especially from a sound money perspective. So, when you ask me about some of the challenges, I think the biggest challenge right now is that the education and the dialogue around Bitcoin among Muslim scholars and just Muslims in general is that the dialogue needs to be improved. And that's why we started Bitcoin Majlis, because our hope is to hopefully provide educational material to other Muslims that are looking to learn about Bitcoin, so that like if a Muslim finds out, say, like, people always want to get into Bitcoin whenever they see the fiat price rise. So whenever they see that, I don't want them to go to like some crypto expert. I want them to come to us or some other, I want to say that we're not the only ones that are doing this. There are others. But it just feels like that among like the global Muslim population, especially when you're talking about Islamic finance or Islamic banking, like this whole conversation is completely absent from it. So I think, that's the thing that we're trying to do, is we're trying to improve the education so that we can improve the dialogue around Bitcoin and hopefully get Muslims to understand it and realize that from our view, Bitcoin is the most Islamic form of money. And I guess to a lesser extent, there are other challenges in that I think, a lot of the development that's occurring on a lot of the Bitcoin layers is kind of happening outside of the Muslim world. It feels like, of course, there are Muslims that are like building things, but I feel like a lot of the building that's occurring is obviously not, there's like 1.7, 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide, and I feel like there's a lot of potential to be tapped in there to build creative solutions or creative layers on top of the Bitcoin network that I feel like it's kind of lacking, and that's also like another goal that we have. But overall, I mean, I think, like the mission or the vision that we have for Bitcoin Majlis is that we want the Muslim world to get off of the usury-based fiat standard and go to a more halal or an Islamically based ethical money standard, which is Bitcoin. And that's kind of our goal with starting this Bitcoin Majlis initiative.
Yes, and I want to kind of expound on you talking about Bitcoin being halal, but before I get there, how does Bitcoin factor into the Islamic practice of charity? I'm really curious about that, and if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think there's so many different aspects that I feel like have that really haven't been explored, and it's I think charity is kind of one of those things. So, for those that are not familiar, for Muslims, we follow like our 5 pillars of Islam, And one of those pillars is zakat, or basically charity. So every Muslim in the world is required to give, if they're financially eligible, they're required to give away a certain amount of their wealth to charity. Now, a lot of so the problem, one of the problems with the fiat system is that, as we know, because of because of money printing, everyone's savings is inherently debased, and everyone's savings is losing value. So this inherently means that there are, overall, people are going to have less savings. And when you have less savings, you're not able to pay as much zakat, or as much as much charity on your on your savings. So I think one of the neat things about Bitcoin is that, one, being on a Bitcoin standard where you don't have basically a debt-based economy running, uh, you have this idea, or this culture, or this movement to save more. And when you're saving more, you're inherently going to be able to pay more charity. And I think that's kind of lost on a lot of Muslims, because they'll say that if everyone's saving, that's going to be bad for the economy because prices will crash or whatever. But no, what happens is that people will save, therefore people will pay more charity, which will help more poor people. And I think one of the demonstrations of that we've done on for Bitcoin Majlis, what we did last year was, we were in contact with a brother that was involved with helping out this orphanage in Uganda. So we were also in contact with them, and so they also accept Bitcoin over the Lightning Network for their orphanage, and they use these funds. They document it very well, and where their funds go to, and how the funds are allocated in helping the orphans. So we thought, hey, since we have this Bitcoin Majlis platform, let's see if we can do like a donation drive during the month of Ramadan. So the month of Ramadan is where we fast, where we fast every day for a whole month, and we're encouraged to do more good deeds, especially charity as well. So we decided, hey, let's just do like this donation drive where we will try to use our Twitter accounts and our social media accounts to get people to donate Bitcoin over the Lightning Network to this orphanage. Now, we're not keeping any of the funds. We're calling on everyone anywhere in the world that has Bitcoin that can send it permissionlessly to this one orphanage in Uganda that really needs help with raising funds. So we didn't think it was going to be big or anything, but we did, during Ramadan, we were like, hey, we're doing this initiative. Anyone wants to help, please send your sats over to Orphans of Uganda. And we got people from all over the world donating. We had Tahini's restaurant that came in and donated some. We had just basically people from all over the world, and we were able to raise something around like $6,000 worth of Bitcoin. And at the end of Ramadan, they reached out to us, and they were they were like thanking us because they had never received such huge amounts. And now they were like, hey, now we can actually start building a separate orphanage facility for it, because they manage a lot of orphans and the numbers keep increasing. That we can now build all of this infrastructure to help with taking care of orphans. And I think that's just a really good use case, in that the way I feel like Bitcoin unleashes the pillar of Islam, that is zakat, is that it allows anyone in the world to be able to send funds over to anyone else in the world in a permissionless way. You don't have to worry about your bank account being closed. You can do it over the Lightning Network, where you don't have to pay fees, and it's settled instantly. And I feel like that was a very good use case, in that, yes, there are going to be charity organizations that are going to have to manage who's eligible, or who needs funds, and be able to like vet different organizations to make sure that they're not scams. But at the end of the day, you don't have to use the fiat system in order to send your debt-based money to some other bank that's going to send it to some other bank that's going to get some kind of fee or whatever, and finally be able to send it to where it needs to go. You can now send Bitcoin peer-to-peer from one person to the next person that needs it. And I feel like that is, especially when you combine Bitcoin with the Lightning Network, I feel like that completely changes the way we do charity globally.
The burning question that I wanted to ask you, Muslim Bitcoiner, is, when you talk about all of these different charity processes that the Muslim community has to kind of go through, which I think is great, I think is awesome. I think a lot more other people, communities, religions should kind of adopt that approach. Um, how does Bitcoin align or clash with being halal? And I'm asking that because there's so many people that look at Bitcoin as a first world money, a digital money. It's something the Americans created, it's something the Europeans created. Can it be trusted? Will it be haram? Will it be something that indebts us, right? So it's like I wanted to ask you so that my audience can hear, like, do you think that Bitcoin aligns with being halal or clashes with it?
I mean, so obviously I think I would say that Bitcoin is not only halal, but I feel like it's the best form of money that aligns with our faith. And there are a lot of concerns, especially from scholars and Muslims that don't understand it. They'll say that like you said, Bitcoin comes from the West, and someone can just change it, and one day you wake up and all your Bitcoin is gone. I think what kind of what kind of helps people understand is that anyone can run a node on the Bitcoin network and enforce the consensus rules that everyone else has to abide by. And I think that's kind of like missed from the discussion whenever people are like, "Oh, Bitcoin is this thing that's controlled by other people and we don't know really how it works." Well, actually, if you can download the software here, like you can go on GitHub or whatever, look at the code and see what you're running and see what other people are running, so that it's not this like black box. Like it's a very it's a very streamlined, a very clear way of running a global decentralized ledger. And I feel like this is kind of lost on, say, for example, I'm not picking on any one scholar, but like, say, if a scholar looks at Bitcoin and they see, oh, they see the volatility going up and down, and they just conclude that, like, oh, Bitcoin is this volatile digital asset, it has no intrinsic value, and it's like gambling. Well, I think what kind of helps make the case for Bitcoin being halal is that anyone can participate on the network. And I like to look at it as not like, as a lot of scholars will look at it as like this get rich quick scheme, but really, I mean, Bitcoin at the end of the day is a protocol no different than, say, HTTP um, uh, um, or like the email protocol or the internet protocol or anything like that. It's basically just a set of rules that anyone in the world can run, and there's not like this like black box or these group of shadowy supercoders that are going to completely drain your wallet or whatever. So I think it's important to look at Bitcoin as a ledger and as a protocol before making like all of these accusations about, like, Bitcoin being from the West or it's like some secret government project. I think it's actually the opposite. It's transparent, it's open, anyone can participate, it's permissionless and censorship resistant. And I feel like, when you include all of that and you realize, oh, okay, everyone has to play by the same rules on this Bitcoin network. There's not any sort of privilege that bankers get or governments get, is that everyone has to play by the same rules. And I feel like that's a more ethical or a more ethical way of running a monetary system that's more in line with Islam, especially when you compare it to the fiat system that we currently have now.
And through your podcast, you've spoken with numerous Muslims in the Bitcoin space. What are some of the most profound insights or stories that you've come out of these conversations?
That's a good question. Going back to my earlier point about the education that's lacking. I think as I'm doing this, like I have like our my podcast and our Bitcoin Majlis initiative. As I'm talking with more and more people, we kind of it's weird because, like, I've talked to Muslims that are in Lebanon, in Pakistan, in Malaysia, all over the world. And there are, like, obviously differences in Bitcoin adoption in each of those jurisdictions, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think we can all kind of get together and say that, like, all right, I think the thing that's lacking is that Muslims aren't getting it. Now, there are different approaches in how to solve that. So one thing that a lot of, including myself, a lot of Muslims obsess over is that we feel like we need to convince the scholars of Islam to understand Bitcoin, and then other people will, or other Muslims will kind of follow suit and adopt it. And I've kind of I've kind of moved away from that line of thinking, because I think kind of like how Bitcoin emerged from a very bottoms up approach. There wasn't like anything top down kind of imposing Bitcoin on anyone. I feel like the adoption of Bitcoin in the Muslim world is going to happen from a bottoms up approach. I feel like the way, kind of like if you look at how the internet was adopted, if you look at a lot of, not a lot of, but I guess some legal rulings from Islamic scholars, they initially looked at the internet and they declared it haram or prohibited because they saw this internet, and for good reason. I mean, the internet will allow people to do very immoral things, or a lot of scams happen on the internet and people get hacked and stuff. So those, I don't want to make them sound like they're idiots or whatever for declaring the internet to be haram, but I feel like we're kind of seeing that same way. But even with all of those scholars kind of issuing those legal rulings on the internet, the Muslim world adopted the internet anyway. It wasn't because the scholars finally deemed it halal that people started using the internet. People were using it because they needed to use it. They wanted to participate in I guess, the global protocol in the way we all communicate with each other on the internet. And I feel like Bitcoin adoption in the Muslim world is going to happen in the same way. There are scholars now, and I feel like the narrative is slowly changing, where you have scholars that would immediately look at Bitcoin and say it's haram. They're kind of like in the middle ground where they're like, yeah, it's kind of haram, it's kind of halal. We're not really sure yet, stay away from it. But I feel like as time goes on, they're finally going to accept that Bitcoin is halal, and then we get to the final conclusion that, wait, Bitcoin is the most Islamic form of money. But I feel like we'll get there because people in the Muslim world are adopting it, not so much out of convenience, but out of necessity. I mean, when you look at like the hyperinflation in Lebanon or other Muslim countries, or Turkey or Egypt, for example, I feel like you'll see people in those countries that are going to adopt Bitcoin, not because it's convenient, but because they have no other choice. Their currency is completely devaluing. Um, they may not have access to other assets or other financial vehicles to be able to store their wealth, and then they're going to look at this Bitcoin thing and realize, oh, there's this Bitcoin thing that no one can manipulate. It has a fixed supply, and I actually own it and control it, and I can take it with me anywhere in the world. So if they wanted to leave their hyperinflationary country, they could do that. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the adoption from the Muslim world. I think is going to be primary, and I think this is a good thing. Naturally, like, we kind of think that like a lot of technologies or a lot of ideas get adopted because of a top-down approach. I mean, even when you look at Islam, I mean, the way Islam spread wasn't because there was a government imposing Islam to its people. No, it was just, like people in the desert adopting it and adopting the message and spreading it that way. I mean, it was a very bottoms up approach. And I just feel like whenever a new technology or a new idea gets adopted, it's always going to get adopted from a bottoms up approach. And that's a more effective way for things to spread rather than having something spread from a top down approach, because I feel like that's how fiat operates. Is basically you have someone at the top imposing their rule or their laws on to the citizens, and the citizens have to kind of go along with it, even if they do or don't believe in it, or if they do or they don't want it. But the way Bitcoin is going to happen, I think the global adoption in the Muslim world is going to happen from a bottoms-up approach rather than a top-down
Well,
approach.
you have places like Dubai who are very technically savvy. They have a lot of blockchain protocols going out throughout their city. And I always wanted to know, like, what do you think the relationship between the Muslim community and Bitcoin will be in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think that places like Dubai are going to take that and push it to the forefront? Or do you think places like Lebanon that actually really need Bitcoin and use it as a store of value will kind of grow out this organic movement like the Muslim, movement did back in the desert?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's going to be both. What I am afraid of with places like Dubai that you said like are getting into kind of like a lot of the blockchain. Dubai is still going through its blockchain craze right now, but I think one of the things that worries me is that I feel like Dubai is just going to be kind of stuck in this blockchain phase for a long time, while the rest of the world finally figures out that blockchain and crypto don't really add anything, and they'll get onto a Bitcoin standard first, while places like Dubai and other Muslim uh, uh, other Muslim jurisdictions are going to be stuck on kind of like this blockchain craze that we've kind of moved on from, like from 2017, especially. I think also, in addition to that, I mean, I think there's also going to be a bottoms-up approach from countries like Lebanon and Turkey and Egypt, where you have these hyperinflationary regimes. But I am kind of worried that I feel like one of the things that we want to educate Muslims on is the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, because I just feel like what's going to happen, and what I'm afraid might happen, is that, like say Dubai gets really big into crypto and Web3 and all of this, and then crypto crashes while Bitcoin is going to move along. Then they're going to come to the conclusion that, like, oh, this whole crypto thing's been a scam all along, it's now banned, or a government will come in and they'll impose that rule on people where they'll say, okay, now crypto including Bitcoin is banned because it's all a scam. But so that maybe I'm being too dramatic when I'm mentioning that, but that's also a fear, where I feel like places like Dubai, even though they are kind of like at the forefront of adopting Bitcoin from a crypto perspective, it might backfire in the future, but who knows? And I think it's good, that you have kind of that approach that Dubai is taking, as well as the approach that I think a lot of other Muslim countries are going to adopt in hyperinflationary regimes. I think both of those things will kind of propel Bitcoin to be able to be used more widely. And I think as a lot of institutional investors kind of come onto the Bitcoin scene, especially with like the Bitcoin ETF coming, I think even though I don't like to see Bitcoin being transformed in that way, I do think it's going to make it more legitimate, especially among the central bankers of those countries. If they decide that they're going to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, I mean, I think that's going to be a huge game changer, because now everyone realizes, oh, this Bitcoin thing is like actually institutionally legit. Our governments and bankers are adopting it. Now we can go get some. But I feel like by that point, it'll probably be too late for those Muslims that are in the hyperinflationary regimes. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about like where I think the adoption is going to come from and how I feel about it. But I think, like I said, I think it's going to come from both. It's going to come from places like Dubai, but also in places like Lebanon.
And given the massive annual economic activity around things like Hajj, for example, do you see a future where Bitcoin plays a role in the pilgrimage of the financial transactions that we see in Bitcoin? Do you think that that will play a role in Hajj as well?
Oh, that's interesting. I've never actually thought about that. I do think, because the Hajj. So for people that are not familiar with, that's also one of the other pillars of Islam, is that we have to make pilgrimage to Mecca, and we have to do this at least once in our life. So whenever it's like the Hajj season, you see like Muslims from all over the world coming to this one place, and they're doing pilgrimage, and it's a great view. I've never actually done it before, but I like to watch like the broadcast that Saudi Arabia does whenever that happens, because I think it's just really cool. But when you consider that Islam, or Muslims, are a very global community, it's a very global network, and specifically when you look at Hajj, I mean, you have all of these Muslims from all over the world come. They don't speak the same language, they don't come from the same cultures, but they all kind of have the same moral belief. Especially they all have the same religion. I think it makes sense that if you're going to coordinate the Muslims economically in any way, or if you're going to have them especially come for Hajj, I think it makes sense for all of them to be able to communicate value on a shared global decentralized ledger, rather than having all of these people coming from all over the world are going to now have to exchange their currency for the local currency, and then they're going to have to exchange it back. I mean, that works obviously, but I feel like because you're inherently dealing with an institution that's inherently global, in that you have to coordinate, that Muslims all over the world have to do this one thing in Mecca. I think it makes sense to me whenever we're on a Bitcoin standard. I think that's going to help kind of streamline that process even better, because you have Muslims that are now finally able to, we may not be able to speak the same language, but we can speak the same language of value of Bitcoin. And I think that has a lot of other implications, because, like, if you have like this global Muslim network, it makes sense to not have all of these different fiat currencies competing with each other, it just introduces a lot of friction within the global Muslim community. But if they're all on a Bitcoin standard, we're able to communicate very effectively and very seamlessly and very frictionlessly, especially over the Lightning Network, for as just an example, being able to send sats to each other and being able to stream sats to each other. I think that will help with not just Hajj, but I think that'll also help with zakat. I think that'll help with coordinating and allocating capital globally among the Muslim community. I feel like Bitcoin is this thing that will help Muslims, I think, finally wake up and realize, any Muslim you talk to in the world, they definitely feel like there's some fragmentation. Muslims are kind of divided right now. But I feel like Bitcoin is one of those things that's not going to fix it completely, but I feel like will get us in the right direction for all the Muslims in the world to be able to coordinate globally, especially economically.
Yeah, that hit so many points, and I was super excited to ask you that question in particular because, like you said, that's not something that I've really seen you mention on your show or even heard a lot of Muslims actually talking about. And it's just interesting to see how those two kind of major topics, both in the digital asset world, but also in the Muslim religious world, might kind of like come to a head and create this synergy. So it's always beautiful to really hear that kind of process from someone that's actually really immersed into the religion so we can get it from an insider's view and not an outsider's view. So thank you, Muslim Bitcoiner, for this episode. It's been great. I really appreciated all the insight that you've given people, and I hope that my audience can really learn a lot about not only the Muslim religion, but what you have going on, your platforms, your company that you co-founded with your brother. I think that these are instrumental in getting us to this Bitcoin standard globally.
Yeah, thank you. And just if you want to find me on Twitter, it's now called X. It's at mbitcoiner. You can visit us also at bitcoinmajlis.org. You can also follow the Bitcoin Majlis Twitter account at Bitcoin Majlis. And for any Muslims that are listening, if you are curious about Bitcoin, please you can contact us and we can help you get started. Or if you want to just read about it, get a copy of the Bitcoin Standard and just start reading and start learning about it.
Yes, and I look forward to more thought-provoking questions and conversations regarding Bitcoin from you later down the road. Don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe with your friends and family if you found that this conversation was insightful. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you, Muslim Bitcoiner. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you.